Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every woman's journey when something inside her quietly shifts, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes after giving her heart, her patience, her effort, and realizing it was never truly seen. Today, I want to speak to that moment, the moment when she stops waiting, stops explaining, and starts growing, because by the time he regrets losing her, she's no longer the same. She's stronger, wiser, and finally rooted in a self-worth that doesn't ask for permission. Silence has a power that words often fail to match. In relationships, especially those where effort has been silence doesn't just fill the space, it transforms it. When a woman who used to show up with care, affection, and consistency suddenly goes quiet, it sends a shockwave through the dynamic. It's not just that she's not texting or calling anymore. It's that the emotional current she brought, the energy that made him feel important, is no longer there to support his comfort, and that absence hits much harder than most people expect. At first, he might not notice. He might assume she's just busy, or maybe trying to prove a point. But as the minutes stretch into hours and the hours into days, something changes. He starts checking his phone more than usual. He replays conversations in his head, looking for clues. He remembers the way she used to laugh at his jokes, the way she made him feel seen. Now there's nothing, no message, no reaction, no access. That emotional silence, once something he may have hoped for in moments of irritation, now becomes deafening. Silence forces people to sit with their own thoughts, and most of us don't do that well, especially when we're used to someone else providing emotional stimulation or reassurance. In a world where attention has become the currency of validation, the sudden withdrawal of someone's presence, especially someone who cared deeply, can feel like a complete loss of emotional control. It's not just that he misses the conversation. He misses the comfort of being desired, of being thought about. He starts to wonder if she's moved on, if she's happier now, if she's finally realized she deserves better. That doubt festers because the silence gives it nowhere to hide. When you stop talking, you stop reassuring. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the story he's been telling himself, that you'll always be there, that your love is unconditional regardless of his effort. And the moment you stop filling in those blanks is the moment he's forced to look at his own. The late replies, the broken promises, the inconsistency. It all comes rushing back to him, but now there's no one to deflect it to. He has no one to blame, no one to distract him, no one to chase him down and tell him it's okay. That silence creates a mirror, and it's often not a reflection he enjoys. This is the part no one warns him about. He thought space would be freeing, that maybe you caring less would make things easier, but the reality is, people only appreciate consistency when it's gone, and that's the power of your silence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't plead, it simply is, and in that stillness he's left to wonder, to reflect, to regret. What makes silence so impactful is that it requires nothing from you. No explanation, no confrontation, no emotional breakdown. Just the absence of energy that used to be there, and in that void, he's not just dealing with your distance. He's finally experiencing the weight of everything he never gave back. He can't hide behind excuses anymore. There's nothing left for him to push against. You've become air, untouchable, unseen, but impossible to ignore. He may try to test the waters, send a casual message, or like a post just to see if you'll break the silence. But you don't, because the silence wasn't a tactic, it was a decision born not from spite, but from exhaustion, a quiet way of saying, I'm done explaining why I deserve more, and that's when the impact becomes permanent. Because silence isn't the absence of love. Sometimes it's the purest form of self-love, a declaration that you've had enough, that you're not willing to be the only one fighting for something that takes two. And while he's wrestling with the absence, you're finally finding peace in it. The noise, the second guessing, the constant emotional labor, it's gone. All that remains is space. Space for you to breathe, to heal, and to remember what it feels like to be whole without needing someone else to see your worth. The silence, though painful at first, becomes your freedom, and the louder it echoes for him, the clearer everything becomes for you. Choosing to ignore him isn't a strategy to manipulate emotions or gain the upper hand. It's not a game. It's a boundary, a firm, invisible line drawn not to punish, but to protect. And that boundary speaks volumes, especially when you've spent weeks, months, maybe even years, trying to communicate your needs and feelings only to be met with indifference, inconsistency, or confusion. At some point, words stop making a difference. That's when action, quiet, dignified, deliberate action, becomes necessary. Boundaries are not about hurting others. They're about taking care of yourself. When you decide to go silent, to stop texting first, to no longer chase someone who isn't meeting you halfway, it's not about playing hard to get. It's about getting hard to hurt. Because being emotionally available to someone who repeatedly ignores or disrespects your presence is an exhausting place to live. It leaves you feeling unseen, unheard, and unsettled. And when that's your emotional baseline, something has to change. What makes it difficult is the internal guilt that often comes with it, the idea that if you really cared, you would keep trying, that love means pushing through, holding on, fighting harder, but there's a difference between love and self-abandonment. A boundary is what protects you from stepping so far into someone else's emotional world that you lose your own. It says, I love you, but I also love myself, and I won't keep giving to something that leaves me empty. When you stop responding, when you create that space, people may label you cold, dramatic, even heartless, but they're only seeing the result, not the road that led there. They didn't see the endless chances, the late night tears, the rereading of messages wondering what went wrong. They didn't see the compromise after compromise that left you feeling smaller each time. That silence isn't random, it's earned, and the boundary it forms is a final attempt to respect yourself when someone else hasn't. It's a boundary that says, I won't beg for connection anymore. It's a line that says, I'm not going to keep explaining my worth. And it's a declaration that you will no longer participate in emotional dynamics where you're constantly required to prove your value just to be treated decently. This boundary isn't to provoke him, it's to protect you. People often misunderstand this kind of silence. They assume it's manipulation, that you're trying to make someone miss you so they'll chase you. But if that was the goal, you'd be performing. You'd still be tied to the outcome, watching every minute go by to see if he cracks first. But this kind of boundary isn't rooted in games, it's rooted in surrender. You're no longer playing because the game was never fair to begin with. You're stepping away, not to control the narrative, but because you're tired of being in a story where your needs are the subplot. This kind of boundary is quiet. It doesn't come with grand speeches or dramatic exits. It's simply a decision, a quiet shift in energy, one that others feel even if they don't understand it, and that's okay. You don't owe everyone an explanation. Your silence isn't a question, it's a conclusion. You can love someone and still need space. You can forgive someone and still walk away. You can care deeply and still choose distance when closeness starts to cost your peace. That's not bitterness, that's maturity. That's what real boundaries look like, and the most powerful part, you don't need them to understand it. You don't need their validation to make your boundary valid. The boundary is yours. It's personal. It's born from experience, from heartbreak, from finally choosing to stop shrinking for someone else's comfort. It's not a wall, it's a gate, and only those who respect your value get to walk through it. So when you go quiet, when you stop engaging, when you step away, it's not silence for attention. It's silence for self-preservation. You're not closing the door to be cruel. You're closing it because you've knocked enough times and no one ever answered. And now you've found the strength to stop waiting. That's not a move in a game, that's a move toward healing. Detachment doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, moment by moment, through every unanswered message, every vague excuse, every late night overthinking session that ends in exhaustion. It begins with disappointment and ends in emotional silence, not the kind that begs for attention, but the kind that signals a final shift. A woman doesn't detach because she stopped caring. She detaches because caring too much started to hurt, and when that detachment sets in, it often does what chasing never could. It triggers his regret. When you're deeply connected to someone, your presence becomes a constant, something they feel even in your silence. They get used to your energy, your laughter, your way of making everything feel less heavy. Your concern, your checking in, your little gestures, those are all woven into the rhythm of their life. But the moment you detach, that rhythm breaks. You're no longer trying to explain how you feel or asking them how they feel about you. You're not waiting for them to get it or hoping they'll magically start showing up differently. You've let go, and that stillness is unsettling for them. Detachment is not indifference, it's not bitterness. It's the quiet decision to stop giving emotional CPR to something that refuses to breathe on its own. It's when you stop twisting yourself into someone who's easier to love, simpler to understand, or less emotional. It's when you realize that trying harder has never gotten you what you needed, so you stop trying, and that's when the shift becomes undeniable. You're still there physically, maybe, but emotionally, you've stepped back. The cord is no longer connected, and that space you create, that vacuum, it's felt. This is when he starts to notice, not because you raised your voice or sent a dramatic goodbye message, but because the energy he once depended on is missing. He may not say it outright. At first, it's subtle. He might check your social media more often, start conversations out of nowhere, or ask indirect questions trying to figure out if you've moved on. That's the discomfort of regret beginning to surface. Because when someone has grown used to being emotionally fed by your effort, your detachment starves their certainty. He starts to reflect on the moments he brushed off your concerns, the times you opened up and he shrugged it off. The little things he didn't think mattered, like ignoring your messages, changing plans last minute, or acting distant, now replay in his mind, but this time without your voice to soften the blow. Regret doesn't always show up as an apology. Sometimes it looks like confusion, frustration, or even blame, but behind that is a man realizing that the person he assumed would always be there isn't anymore. The irony is that detachment makes you magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because you're no longer giving your power away. You're no longer anxiously waiting for someone to meet your standards. You've stepped into a space where you are at peace, and that peace becomes deeply attractive to someone who once thrived on your chaos. You're not texting back immediately, not over-explaining, not reacting, and that emotional neutrality is louder than any argument you could have had. He may try to re-engage, he might start showing up again, offering you attention he once withheld. But now you see things differently. You're no longer looking at potential, you're looking at patterns. Detachment brings clarity. It reveals who shows up when you stop doing the work for both people. And while he's dealing with the rising regret of how he treated you, you're quietly healing from the very thing that caused you to let go in the first place. Regret doesn't always come fast. For some, it comes when they see you smiling without them. For others, it hits late at night when the silence is too loud to ignore, but it comes, and it's triggered not by your tears, not by your words, but by your distance, by the absence of the very thing he didn't know how to appreciate when he had it. And by then, you're no longer standing at the door. You've already walked through it, you've detached, and that changes everything. Self-worth doesn't arrive all at once. It builds in the quiet moments when you start choosing yourself over the need to be chosen. It's born the day you finally stop asking why someone couldn't love you the way you deserved, and instead ask yourself why you kept accepting less. It's not loud. It doesn't demand to be seen. But when it settles in, everything begins to shift, and with it comes a wave of clarity that changes the way you love, the way you respond, and the way you allow others to show up in your life. When you begin to see your own worth, your perspective on relationships transforms. You stop getting caught in the loop of trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't meeting you halfway. You stop trying to win affection, loyalty, or attention. You realize that love isn't meant to be earned through sacrifice and struggle. It's meant to be mutual, safe, and nourishing. And when that realization roots itself deeply within you, all the noise around you starts to quiet down. The chaos that once made you question yourself becomes less confusing. Because now you're not viewing someone's inconsistency as a challenge to overcome. You're seeing it as a sign that your energy doesn't belong there. You no longer need a long explanation when someone starts to pull away. You don't spiral over every delayed text or unread message. You recognize that when someone values you, they don't leave room for confusion, and when someone doesn't, no amount of overthinking or overgiving will change that. That is what self-worth gives you, emotional clarity. You stop personalizing someone else's behavior, and instead you start observing it. You begin to say to yourself, this is not about me. This is about how they choose to show up, and I get to choose what I do with that. With that shift comes power, a quiet, grounded kind of power that doesn't need validation to exist. You stop operating from fear, fear of losing them, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, and you start making decisions from peace. From knowing that if something costs your self-respect, it's too expensive, and that no one, no matter how charming, how connected you once felt, or how much potential they had, is worth losing your sense of self. This clarity doesn't mean you stop feeling. You still care. You still have moments of vulnerability, but now there's a boundary in place. Not a wall to shut love out, but a filter to protect your energy. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can give without begging. You can care without chasing. And if someone doesn't meet you in that space, you're able to let go, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you understand that keeping yourself intact matters more than being chosen by someone who never truly saw you. Self-worth helps you see patterns instead of potential. You're no longer stuck in cycles of maybe if I try harder. You understand that love doesn't ask you to try harder when you're already giving your best. It asks you to see clearly, and from that clarity, you start to attract people and experiences that reflect your growth, not because you're perfect, but because you've stopped settling for the connections that make you doubt your value. And yes, people will notice. The ones who once felt comfortable with your confusion may be rattled by your confidence. The ones who relied on your insecurity to keep the power imbalance will feel the shift when you no longer seek their approval. They may test it, they may try to pull you back into old roles, but you've changed. You no longer look at love as something that requires you to lose parts of yourself. You've seen what it costs, and now you're not willing to pay that price again. There's a calm that comes with self-worth, a quiet knowing that if someone walks away, you don't fall apart because you're not chasing closure, you're not clinging to the past, you're moving forward even if it hurts because you've chosen to trust yourself. And that clarity, that unshakable, powerful clarity, isn't just healing, it's magnetic. It changes the way the world responds to you, because the moment you stop trying to convince someone to love you, is the moment you become undeniable. There's a turning point in every woman's journey when her pain becomes her power. It doesn't happen in a flash. It comes after long nights of doubt, moments where she questioned her worth, and days spent analyzing every word, every silence, every change in tone. She held on longer than she should have, hoping he would wake up and realize what he had. She stayed through the phases of hot and cold, through confusion masked as mystery, through affection that always had limits. She tried, forgave, adjusted, and gave the benefit of the doubt until it cost her peace. And then one day something changed, not in him, but in her. Growth doesn't begin with anger. It begins with exhaustion, not the kind you recover from after sleep, but the kind that sets in deep when you're emotionally burned out from carrying the weight of a connection that doesn't lift you. It's in that quiet breaking point that she begins to release what she once clung to. She stops waiting, she stops explaining, she stops hoping that he'll come around, and as painful as it is, that's when the real shift begins. She doesn't grow through confrontation. She grows in the space where she used to overfunction, the space where she used to make excuses for his behavior, soften his sharp edges, and pour her love into an empty container. That space becomes the foundation of something new. She begins to rebuild. She explores the parts of herself that she had muted in the relationship. She begins to laugh more freely, focus on her goals, reconnect with the people and passions she'd once neglected. Her world, which once revolved around his attention, slowly starts to orbit around her own evolution. And meanwhile, he starts to feel the difference. At first, it's subtle. He notices she's not checking in, not watching his stories, not reaching out. He may assume she's playing a game or just taking space, but time passes, and she doesn't return. That's when it starts to sink in. The texts don't come. The emotional safety net he once took for granted is no longer there. The energy she gave so effortlessly is gone, and he's left with silence. Not the temporary kind, but the kind that feels permanent. Regret doesn't hit him at the moment he hurt her. It rarely does. It comes later, when the realization sinks in that she's not waiting anymore, that the door she once kept cracked open has quietly shut, that the woman who once longed for his attention has become the woman he now longs for. And what makes that regret sting is not just her absence, it's her transformation. He sees it in the way she carries herself, the way she no longer needs to be seen to feel worthy, the way she's flourishing in a life that no longer includes him. By the time he's ready to give her what she asked for, she's no longer asking. By the time he understands her silence, she's found her voice elsewhere. She's not bitter. She's not trying to make him feel what she felt. She's just done explaining, done waiting, done shrinking. And in that peace, she becomes unreachable, not because she's punishing him, but because she's grown past the version of herself who once thought his love would complete her. Growth isn't loud. It doesn't come with announcements. It shows in the moments when she chooses her peace over his confusion, when she no longer romanticizes his potential, but respects her own reality, when she sees clearly that closure isn't something he can give, because it came the moment she chose herself. So while he may look back and wish he'd done things differently, while he replays the missed chances and lost connection, she's not waiting for an apology. She's not checking to see if he's watching. She's not hoping for reconciliation. She's moved into a different season of life, a season where she is finally rooted in her own worth and no longer available for anything that made her question it. He may regret deeply, but by the time he does, she's no longer the same woman who once waited for him to care. She's grown, and that growth has taken her somewhere he can no longer reach. If this message spoke to something deep within you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. Growth is not always loud, but it's powerful. And sometimes the greatest transformation happens in silence, when you finally choose yourself. Thank you for watching, and remember, the version of you that no longer waits is the version that truly rises.